Alright, so I want to show you how to do the optional asset allocation assignment. So if you click on the mini project on Canvas, you will see this screen. Oops, wrong direction. Okay, so this process explains how I'm going to do the grading on it, and I'll just let you read through that. But I will say that the project is not extra credit, but if you do so poorly on it that it would lower your grade, I will just pretend you didn't do the project and grade you as if you hadn't done the project, because I don't want the project to result in you're getting a lower score. So there are two files. On the first file, this particular one, it's just a list of the students in the class and which funds you've been assigned. So open this file, find your name, and you're going to find two ticker symbols next to your name. So there's a bond fund and a stock fund. So I am going to do the stock fund for the test student who has been assigned this particular fund, BVSNX. So the next step is to open this second file right here, and that's a Word document, and you can print it and just handwrite your answers, or you can open it in Word and type your answers. I'm going to open it in Word and type my answers and actually do the math in Excel, just because for me that's fairly quick. So open the file. It's going to look like this. And here's where you would write your bond fund. And so my test student's bond fund was MGFIX. So I would just type that in there. And then the stock fund was BVSNX. Don't get them confused, because you're going to do more with the stock fund than you are with the bond fund. And so the next step is to just complete table 1 for your two individuals. So let me give you some background. This is a project on asset allocation, and so we have two people who both worked for the same company, both made the same salary, both saved the same percentage of their income. They put aside 10% of their pre-tax income to their specific fund, and they did this for about a decade. And then I'm going to have you forecast how much they would have in that fund 30 years later. And the difference is that Susan chose a very conservative fund. She chose a fund that invests mostly in bonds. Bob, on the other hand, was much more aggressive of an investor in terms of his asset allocation. He chose a fund that invests almost entirely in stocks. And remember, I told you in class that 90% of a person's return hinges on their asset allocation. And in this case, this Susan had a bond allocation with very little or no stocks. Bob had a stock allocation with very little or no bonds. And it's going to result in a drastic difference in how much they have at the end of their 40-year time period. So the first step is just to collect some information on how the bond did. So to me, the easiest way to input this information is to use Excel, but that's easy for me because I'm really familiar with Excel. It might be easier for you to just do it on a calculator and type it in, but I'm just going to highlight this table. And the way I did that, it's very hard to see on my laptop screen, but if I click anywhere in the table, in the upper left corner, there's a tiny little plus sign. And I'm going to click on that plus sign. It's going to highlight the whole table. I'm going to copy it, Control C, and pop over to a blank spreadsheet and just paste that table in here. Now it's resulted in some ugly things that I would take the time to fix if I were turning this in, but I won't take the time to fix them for the video. And oops, I didn't mean to do that. It's interesting that when it pasted those footnotes as links. it is being pretty annoying. I am gonna just clear those because they're annoying me. So I am gonna go to, oh, here we go, clear hyperlinks, and hopefully it got rid of them. And so now I can just delete them. Before, anytime I clicked on them, it um, took me to the footnote. All right. So these are just little footnotes that tell you how to do the math. Um, the first thing that I guess I'll do is just go find Bob's fund on Morningstar. So I'm only going to do Bob's fund. Susan's fund, the process would be identical as the process for Bob's fund. You'll just end up with different numbers. So on Bob's fund, I'm going to pop over to Morningstar. He had BVSNX, so I entered that ticker here and pressed return. I've already done that, so I already have the fund pulled up. This is a socially responsible fund for individual investors. And the information that I need for this fund is right now the returns. And so I'm going to click on the performance tab, and I'm going to click on expanded view because I need returns from 2008 through 2017. And I'm just going to highlight these and Control C to copy them. Now notice this is negative 34.77. It's actually a percentage, but it didn't put the percent sign after that. That's important if you're going to pop it into Excel. So for Bob, I need to put those returns here. And notice they're going across horizontally on Morningstar, but in Excel I need them to go vertically, and I need them to start right here. So here's hoping this works. I have put my cursor in 2008, which happens to be black, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And then I'm just going to right click and go paste special. Oh shoot, and it's not going to work. So I'm going to actually hit cancel. I'm going to pop over here. It's not going to work, and I can tell you why, because it didn't show me everything I need. And I'm just going to paste it. And you know what? They're there. They're there, but they're incredibly small. I'm going to zoom back to the normal thing so you can't see them very well. And I will just make them larger this way. Why in the world it pasted them that small, I have no idea. Alright, so at least now I've got them pasted in individual cells, which is what I want, and I'm going to highlight them again and right click and copy. And then, oh, you know what, the easier thing to do, I'll just leave it at that. Pop it into Bob's 2008 year. And now I'm going to right click and I'm going to go paste special. And now you can see on the paste special box there's a whole lot more choices than there were a few minutes ago when I clicked on paste special and then said, oh, it's not going to work. Now I have what I need, and that's the transpose box. So it's going to transpose it from being a horizontal set of data to a vertical one. And so there are my returns for Bob for the years that I need. Now 2008 was blank, that is, or black. That's because I don't need a return for 2008. So even though I pasted one in there, I'm just going to delete it, and I'm going to just copy this formatting. So copy that and come over here and paste special and just paste the format. So now I know for Bob he earned 22.66% in 2009, 13.73 in 2010, and so on. Now I don't yet know though how much money he's put into his account, so I need to figure that out. So the instructions say that he earned the same salary as Susan. She earned 28,000 and her salary has risen at a rate of about 2% a year, and she's contributing 10% of her salary to her 401k. And then the employer matches her 50 cents on every dollar she contributes up to a max of 2,500. So I'm going to pop back to my spreadsheet. And again, you can just be doing this by hand, and that's perfectly fine. So she's making 28,000. I am actually just going to make this font hopefully, well, okay, there we go. I was trying to make it more consistent and more easily readable. And then she puts in 10% of her salary. So I'm going to take B's salary and multiply it by 10% or zero point 0.1. And then the employer, now the employer matches 50 cents on every dollar up to a max of 2,500. So just to get the spreadsheet to calculate that for me, I'm going to use this formula. But you could easily just do this by hand and say, oh, if this number is going to be higher than 2,500, just use the max of 2,500. And actually, let me explain a little more in depth what that means. But I'll do it by calculating this number first. So the employer is going to put in 50 cents for every dollar that Susan puts in or Bob puts in. So Susan or Bob will put in 2,800 in 2008. To figure out how much the employer will put in, just take half of that, 50 cents or zero point 0.5 times C4. Oops, I screwed up. That should be the min formula. So half of 2,800 is 1,400. The employer will put in 1,400, or if this number had turned out to be, let's say, 3,000, the employer has stated, I'm not going to put in any more than 2,500 a year. Even if I took half of what you put in equals more than 2,500, I'm still just going to limit the amount I'm putting in at 2,500. So if this had been 100,000 and Susan had contributed 10,000, the employer would have only put in 2,500. But since this is 28,000, Susan only puts in 10% or 2,800. Half of that is 1,400. Now, I just realized I'm using the actual numbers, and if I could copy this down, it'll just provide you with the answer, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to use a different salary. I'm going to use, I don't know, 50,000 for my example, but y'all need to use 28,000. So, for whatever reason, my computer is not automatically recalculating, so I need to turn that on. I don't know why that's happening. So if you're using Excel and you're finding that that's happening for you, where it's not automatically recalculating, I'm going to cancel this and show you again how I did that. Go to File, Options, and Formulas, and here under Worksheet or Workbook Calculation, set it to Automatic. So if Susan had earned 50,000 and put in 10%, that would be 5,000, and then her employer would match her half up to a max of 2,500. So half of 5,000 is 2,500. Now, I'm only going to do Bob's calculation. So I want to figure out how much Bob has in his 401k. Now if you go back to here, you'll see footnote 4 applies. So I'm going to go read footnote 4. And y'all should read footnotes 1 through 3 as well. So footnote 4 says the balance in this year, which is 2008, is the sum of the contribution made by either Bob or Susan and the employer match. So for this year, Bob contributed 5,000 and his employer match was 2,500. So I take 5,000 plus 2,500 to get 7,500. I don't, for this very first year, have to deal with the rate of return that he's earning because I'm assuming he's putting his balance in at his deposit in at the end of 2008. So it would not have earned interest yet for 2008. It will, though, earn interest for 2009. So let's figure out 2009. And I'm just going to create links in my spreadsheet. So they're getting a raise of 2% a year. I need to consider that in my calculations. I just take 50,000 times 1.02 to the power of 1. I know since it's to the power of 1, I don't actually have to type that, but I'm doing it anyway. This is the same thing as entering in a present value of 50,000, a rate of 2, or an interest rate or an I of 2%, and an N of 1, and then calculating the future value. You should get 51,000. And I can just drag this down now in Excel. Oops, no I can't because I forgot something crucial. I typed in my 50,000 right here. I'm going to just hit undo. Oh shoot. Just going to hit undo. I typed in my 50,000, but I really should have linked it to the previous year. So instead of typing in my 50,000, I'm going to link it. And now to calculate the salary for 2010, I would take this 51,000 as my present value, N is 1, I is 2%, and solve for future value. So I'm just growing this every year by 2%. I don't need the decimals, so you can just enter them as whole numbers. And then I'm checking my formula under the contribution to make sure I created links where I should have. So it's just take the cell to the left that contains the salary, multiply it by 10%. So the contribution for 2009 would be 10% times 51,000, which I could type in, but I don't need to since I have a formula that does that for me. And then the employer match will be half of the contribution unless that would exceed 2,500. If it would exceed 2,500, then limit it to 2,500. My formula takes care of that for me. And you can see that half of all of these would be 2,500 or more, so it's just setting it to the cap of 2,500. That won't be the case for you because your starting salary is much lower. I'm going to actually just enter a starting salary of 30,000, which is different from what yours is and would result in, actually let me do 40,000 because it's not quite high enough to show you what I want. Maybe 45,000. Okay, that's showing me what I want to show you. So at 45,000, half of the 10% contribution is not quite 2,500. If they put in 10%, that's 4,500. Half of that's only 2,250, which doesn't hit that cap of 2,500 yet. But as they get raises over time, they're still putting in 10%, and the employer match is going up. But eventually, once they get past 50,000, the employee saves 10%, or 50,067. Half of that is a little bit more than 2,500, so they've hit that cap of 2,500. So after that point, the employer only puts in 2,500. I'm once again just formatting this so it looks a little better. Okay. Again, the numbers you will have for this won't be the same as mine. And neither will this because you'll have a different fund. Everybody has a different fund. So now for Bob, it is time to start tallying what his running balance in his 401k is. So the very first year, 2008, he put in 6750. If you look at footnote 5, I show you how to do the math for the second year. So footnote 5 says, and I can't really zoom in a whole lot. The first thing I want to point out is convert the return to a decimal form. So he earned 22.66% in 2009. I need to actually represent that as 0.2266, but I'm going to do that in my calculation. For presenting it in the table, I'm just going to leave it at 22.66. So to find the return for 2009, I take the previous year's balance times 1 plus the return as a decimal plus this year's contribution and this year's match. And then all the rest of the years will be calculated the exact same way. I am therefore going to set it up as an equation. So it is the previous year's contribution, the 6750, times 1 plus the current year's return as a decimal. So I could type 0.266 in my formula, but I want a formula that's robust so I can copy it down and it'll automatically do my math for the rest of the years. So I'm going to instead create a link to the 22.66 and divide that by 100, which will convert it to 0.2266. And then I'm going to add the current year's contribution, and I'm on 2009, and then I'm going to add the employer match. So the way Excel's going to work, it's going to do the calculation in the parentheses first. So it's going to take G5, divide it by 100, then add that to 1, which will give it 1.2266. It'll then multiply it by H4, which is the 6750. Then it's going to add the purple number and the green number. So that is the balance in his account after the second year. And now I can just drag this down because my spreadsheet is now set up to automatically recalculate, and I've created links for everything. It has nicely calculated everything for me. And I would just format it to be dollar amounts with no decimals. And I would calculate Susan's information, and I think I will change the background on these guys to the same fill color, although I don't know exactly what I used. That. Anyway, I would just make it look a little better. I'm not going to spend the time to do that. And then just for you, I'm going to highlight in green this number. It's a number we're going to use later. And then I would also highlight this number in green because you're going to use it later as well. And now that I've got all that done, and assuming it looks pretty, I would just highlight it all, copy it, and pop back to my Word document. And then, I'm just going to highlight that and paste. Didn't work very well, did it? Well, it actually worked okay. But I'm going to hit undo. I'm going to delete this. Notice it just deleted the data in there. That's not what I want. I actually want it to delete the whole table. So I'm going to highlight the whole thing plus an extra line. That's going to delete the whole thing. And now I can Control V and paste the one I just copied from Excel into it. And spend a little bit of time making it look good. I'm not going to really do that here, but I would like for you to. Now the next question asks the annual return on Susan's fund. I didn't actually copy the data for Susan's fund because I didn't want to spend the time doing that. I'm only doing Bob's fund for the demo. So let's just skip number 3, but you would work number 3 the same way as you're going to work number 4. Number 4 says what's the average return on Bob's fund, and I thought there was a footnote. It's the first footnote. To calculate this, you just sum the annual returns for Susan or Bob's fund and divide by the number of years of returns, which would be 9. So you just sum these 9 returns and divide by 9. I can easily do that in Excel. So I'm going to pop over that and do that. And I could either add them all together, so just sum those and divide by 9, or there's actually an average function. So I could just use the average function on those 9 years of returns, and it should give me the exact same answer. So 11.46%. And type better than I am, make it look better than I am. And it says show your work. So type in, like if you did the average function, say I use the average function on Bob's returns. Or you can just type in, 22.66 plus 13.73, etc., divided by 9. Don't type etc. Actually type in all the numbers. Now I haven't, well actually I think I did mention the geometric mean in class once. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more in chapter 13, but for now just assume that the geometric mean for Bob is 1.5% lower than his annual average return, this 10 or 11.46%. So his geometric mean is going to be the 11.46% minus 1.5%. It's going to be what? 8.94%. Is that right? No, it's not. I can't believe I can't do this simple math. Oh, 9.94. That's better. So the question then says, if Bob can earn this geometric mean return every year for the next 30 years, how much should he have in his 401k plan? So now you would just plug this 9.94% into your calculator. So you go in as 30. I is the 9.94%, although you don't type the percent sign in your calculator. Present value, and here you see footnote 2. Footnote 2 says to calculate this, take the number in the green box for either Susan or Bob and use it as the present value in this equation or on your financial calculator. The green box, I have since coded the entire box green. This is kind of annoying, but it relates to my video recorder. It's I can't actually scroll to the right because my video recorder is blocking it. But it's the number in this box right here. So I'm going to look in Excel to see what it is. 114,817. So that's going to be my present value. I think it was 114,817. And then I want to solve for future value. And I'm not going to crunch that, but y'all will, and just type your answer in right here. Now, the numbers that I'm getting, oh boy, this is so frustrating. Oh, I see what's happening. My table's too big for it to display. It's going outside the margin, so I'm just going to talk about it in Excel. When you do this calculation for Susan, you should get an answer that's quite a bit smaller than Bob's. I would say it's probably going to be about half Bob's, but maybe it'll be 2/3 Bob's or even 1/4 Bob's. I don't know. But you shouldn't be getting huge answers. Sometimes I have students turn in this project and they put answers of like 30 million here. That's not going to happen. Your answers should be much closer to the numbers that I'm getting. Yours might be 200,000 or 95,000, but if you get something, I would say over about 400,000, you've probably done something wrong. So I would expect the answer for Bob's green number to be six figures, and I would expect the answer for Susan's green number to be five figures, high five figures probably. But don't get horribly upset if yours is different than mine. It should be, because you're going to have different returns than I do. And then when you go to do this part, you might get an answer for Bob that's in the seven digits, but it probably won't be more than maybe 2 or 3 million. And for Susan's, you're going to get an answer that's a whole lot smaller than that, because she has chosen a very conservative asset allocation. And for Susan, when you calculate her geometric mean like we did right here, you're not going to subtract by 1.5, you're going to subtract by only 1. And there's a reason for that, and I'll explain it in chapter 13. The next step is to actually look at Bob and Susan's funds and look in terms of a very broad sense, how have they allocated their assets. I'm not going to type it in, but to get that data, you would pop over to Morningstar and go to the portfolio section. And here, this percent net column is the data that you would type in for Bob and Susan's funds. So I can see here Bob's fund is entirely a stock fund. It has no bonds. And I would type those percentages into this section for Bob. Type your tickers here. And then for question 8, essentially I chose funds for all of you that have problems. I think they're all actively managed, but I don't want you to cite that as a problem. It is a problem, but if you had an actively managed fund that had incredibly low fees that were comparable to a passively managed fund, and it was well diversified and ticked all the boxes, there wouldn't be anything wrong with it. The problem is actively managed funds don't tick all the boxes and they have high fees. But anyway, don't use the fact that it's an actively managed problem or a fund as a problem. But what I want you to do is look at Morningstar for Bob's fund only and find 5 issues about the fund, 5 things that would keep you from investing in it. So why does it not meet the criteria of Finance 216 for investing in it? And I'll also show you some problems for the socially responsible fund. First of all, even though it's an all stock fund and I don't have a problem with that, it has too little in non-US stocks. So the fact that it's got 0% in bonds, I'm okay with. You might want a slightly less aggressive fund for Bob. Bob's 33, it said in the instructions, so maybe you want him to have a little bit of bonds. I'm going to say I don't, so I'm content with 0 bonds so far with Bob, but as he gets older, I think you should add bonds. But the problem is not enough foreign stocks. I can also look at the holding style box right here, and I can see that it's 8% small cap. That might be a little low. Maybe I could push it up a tad, but I'm not necessarily thinking 8% is horribly low. But the bigger problem is it's not nicely balanced between value and growth, which you can see by looking at the first column. It's 22, 13, and 4% in value, but only 9 plus 3% in growth. I think there needs to be a better balance there. It also doesn't have any micro stocks. I wouldn't mind seeing a little bit of micro. And then when I look at the sectors, remember I talked in class how there shouldn't be an equal percentage in each sector because the stock market just isn't built that way. There are a lot more stocks in the technology sector than there are in the energy sector, for instance. But when I look at this particular fund, I can see it's missing a couple of sectors. It doesn't have anything in communication services or utilities, and I think it To be well diversified, it should have something in every single sector. So I think it needs to boost that weight some. It's pretty heavily weighted in consumer cyclical compared to the benchmark. Um, it's underweighted in the financial services compared to the benchmark. And but when I look at the benchmark, I actually know that 8.87% is pretty low for the technology sector, at least compared to the United States. So the fact that this one has, uh, well, I just think this benchmark's a bit underweighted for the US in the technology sector. So I'm not really going to complain about this 18.22%. I've already talked about how it needs more non-US stocks. And so the fact that there are zeros here means it's not well diversified. So there shouldn't really be any zeros in the world region percent stocks. If there are some zeros, it means it's not as well diversified as it could be. And then finally, at least on this page, it doesn't have any stocks in emerging markets, and I would want at least 5%, I think, to be better diversified. And then one more thing you could look at. I only need you to point out 5 things, but I'm going to point out probably more because I want, your fund might not have all these problems. Another issue with this particular fund, index funds sometimes own hundreds, if not thousands, of different stock holdings. This particular fund is more similar to Vice X. It doesn't have very many companies in it. It only has stock in 44 different companies. That's not very many. And this is something I've never actually really talked about, but if you've Morningstar reports the percent of the fund's money that's in the top 10 stock holdings. So if I go to, let's see, down here it's the list of the top 25 holdings that the fund owns. So it owns 12,300 shares of Bank of America and 7,800 shares of Cisco. Well, if I take the top 10 holdings and the amount that that's worth divided by the total value of the company, the top 10 holdings make up 33% of the fund. So 1/3 of the value of the fund. That means it's not particularly well diversified. The more holdings the fund has, the smaller this assets in top 10 holdings will be, and that means it'll be more diversified. Ideally, this would be like around 10% or maybe a little bit higher. And the last thing I want to point out is that or at least I want to look at, is the fund's expense ratio. So I don't like owning funds that have an expense ratio higher than about 0.4, and that would be actually really for a fund that I know has more work to do, and that would be a foreign fund and a small cap fund. So I would accept a slightly higher expense ratio, or I'd be willing to pay a slightly higher expense ratio to a small cap foreign fund. But for a large cap US fund or a large cap foreign fund, I want really low expense ratios, and this one is far too high. Because remember, VTSMX has an expense ratio of I think 0.14%, and there are a few other funds that have even lower ratios than that. All right, that's it.